What if I told you that some of the most famous facts in history were never facts at all? Not small misunderstandings, not innocent classroom errors, but narratives, carefully shaped, emotionally charged, repeated for generations until they replaced reality. What if Napoleon wasn't short? What if Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake"? What if the so-called Dark Ages weren't dark at all? And more importantly, if entire civilizations inherited those myths without question, what are we inheriting right now? History doesn't just record events, it edits them, it compresses them, it simplifies chaos into something memorable. And once a version becomes emotionally satisfying, it spreads faster than correction ever could. Tonight, we're breaking down 15 historical lies that went viral long before the social media existed. And as we move through them, you'll begin to notice something unsettling. These myths weren't random, they were useful. Lie number 1, the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat. You were likely taught this story as a symbol of progress. Medieval peasants standing at the edge of ignorance, Columbus sailing bravely to prove them wrong. It sounds heroic. It is also deeply misleading. Educated Europeans throughout the Middle Ages understood that the Earth was spherical. That knowledge had survived from ancient Greek scholars like Aristotle and Eratosthenes. Medieval universities taught it openly. Church scholars referenced it. The debate surrounding Columbus was not about shape, it was about distance. He underestimated the size of the planet dramatically. So how did the flat Earth myth survive? Because later intellectual movements needed contrast. They needed darkness to frame themselves as light. The myth wasn't about science, it was about superiority. And once 1,000 years are labelled ignorant, very few people go back to check. If an entire era can be rebranded with a false image, what else can? Lie number 2, Napoleon was short. The Napoleon complex. The insecure, aggressive small man. Except Napoleon Bonaparte was average height for his time. The myth began with British wartime propaganda. Political cartoonists exaggerated his size. They shrank him visually to shrink him psychologically. Measurement conversions between French and British systems added confusion. But ridicule spreads fast, faster than correction, and humour cements memory. Over time, the caricature replaced the man, his reforms, his strategy, his restructuring of Europe, all overshadowed by a punchline. Why? Because mockery is simple and simplicity travels. Lie number 3, Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." Few historical quotes are as instantly recognizable. Let them eat cake. Cold, detached, cruel. There is no reliable evidence she ever said it. The phrase existed earlier in literature. It was later attached to her during the French Revolution. Why? Because revolutions require clarity. They require villains. They require lines that fit on posters. A complex explanation about grain shortages does not mobilize a crowd. 3 words do. The quote felt emotionally correct, so it became historically accepted. And once outrage attaches to a face, nuance disappears. Lie number 4. Vikings wore horned helmets. The horned Viking is everywhere, but archaeology says otherwise. Authentic Viking helmets were practical, streamlined, designed for survival. The horned version emerged in 19th century opera. Costume designers wanted spectacle, dramatic silhouettes under stage lighting. It worked. And spectacle became memory. Memory became history. Because the brain remembers drama more easily than data. Lie number 5. The pyramids were built by slaves. The image is powerful. Chains, whips, endless suffering. But excavations near Giza tell a more complicated story. Worker villages, organized crews, evidence of medical care, burial honors. This does not mean forced labor never existed, but the idea of vast slave armies building monuments under constant brutality does not fully align with archaeological evidence. The slave narrative gained traction through biblical association and later interpretation. It provided moral clarity. oppressor, victim, monument. But clarity often flattens complexity, and complexity doesn't go viral. Lie number 6. Witch hunts were pure medieval ignorance. We imagine chaos, illiterate villagers burning women in hysteria. But the height of European witch trials occurred between the 16th and 17th centuries, in societies with courts, with universities, with documentation. The trials were fueled by religious conflict, economic instability, political tension. Fear does not require ignorance. It requires uncertainty, and once fear finds a target, certainty feels safer than doubt. Blaming medieval stupidity allows us to distance ourselves. But structured societies can spiral too. That truth is harder to accept. Lie number 7. Einstein failed math. This one survives because it comforts us, the struggling student who becomes a genius. Except Einstein excelled in mathematics from a young age. The myth grew from grading confusion and selective storytelling. But the truth feels intimidating, so we soften it. We rewrite brilliance into relatability. Sometimes history is distorted, not to attack, but to inspire. And inspiring myths are incredibly durable. Lie number 8. Gladiators always fought to the death. Cinema has shaped this memory. Every fight fatal, every match ending in execution. But gladiators were investments. Training was expensive, feeding was expensive, maintaining them was expensive. While fatal fights occurred, many ended without death. Execution spectacles existed, but they were separate events. Constant slaughter would have been economically irrational, but cinema prefers brutality over budgeting, and repeated imagery reshapes belief. Lie number 9. The American Revolution was only about freedom. Ask most people what the American Revolution was about, and the answer comes quickly. Freedom. Freedom from tyranny. Freedom from oppression, freedom from a distant king. It's powerful, it's inspiring, it's incomplete. The revolution was also shaped by taxation disputes, trade restrictions, territorial expansion, control over westward land, economic tension between colonial elites and British authority. Ideals of liberty were real, but they were intertwined with financial interest and political power. Reducing it to a single word makes it easier to teach, easier to celebrate, easier to chant. But revolutions are rarely pure. They are layered, strategic, and complicated. Slogans survive, negotiations don't. Notice something. The bigger the event, the simpler the explanation becomes. Lie number 10. History is written only by the victors. History is written by the victors. It sounds sharp, almost rebellious, as if we've uncovered manipulation, but it's incomplete. Yes, victors influence narratives. They fund monuments, they preserve records, they shape education. But history is also shaped by archivists, by scholars centuries later, by translators deciding which texts survive across languages, by accidents of preservation. Many civilizations weren't erased because someone rewrote them. They were erased because their records decayed. The phrase itself becomes another simplification. Power matters, but so does survival, and survival is often random. Even cynicism can become a myth. Lie number 11. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. Few myths flatter humanity as elegantly as this one. A structure so vast it can be seen from space. It sounds poetic. It sounds cosmic. It's not accurate. From low Earth orbit, the wall blends into the terrain. Astronauts have confirmed it is difficult to distinguish without magnification. The claim actually predates space travel. It appeared in writing before humans ever left the atmosphere. So why did it endure? Because it elevates human achievement to astronomical scale. It makes us feel monumental, and pride is an excellent preservative. Sometimes myths survive because they make us proud. Sometimes because they make us feel superior. Lie number 12. Medieval people never bathed. The filthy Middle Ages, unwashed bodies, rotting streets, 1,000 years of grime. It supports a clean narrative. We are modern. We are cleaner, we are enlightened. But bathing practices varied across centuries and regions. Public bathhouses existed in many medieval cities. Hygiene standards shifted with changing medical beliefs. Fear of disease altered behavior, not universal ignorance. The exaggerated, dirty medieval image expanded later to emphasize progress. Dark then, clean now. But progress is rarely linear, and labeling an entire era as filthy flattens 1,000 years into a cartoon. Lie number 13. Vikings were only raiders. When you hear Viking, you picture fire, axes, coastal raids. Yes, raids happened, but Norse societies were also traders, explorers, farmers, craftsmen. They built trade networks stretching across Europe into the Middle East. They reached North America centuries before Columbus. Reducing them to raiders erases complexity, but violence is vivid, trade is quiet, and what is vivid survives. The stereotype persisted because burning monasteries are easier to remember than merchant exchanges. Drama wins, detail fades. Lie number 14. The Titanic was completely unsinkable. The Titanic has become a parable. Human arrogance, technological pride, nature's revenge. The ship was marketed as advanced, as highly safe, but the absolutist claim of unsinkable was amplified after the disaster. Media reshaped language, memory intensified it. The tragedy became symbolic, a cautionary tale about hubris. But the more dramatic the moral, the less precise the wording becomes. Events harden into myth when they teach a lesson, even if that lesson simplifies reality. We've seen myths fueled by pride, by propaganda, by fear, by inspiration. Now we end with something larger. Lie number 15. The Dark Ages were dark. The phrase itself is powerful, the Dark Ages. It suggests intellectual silence, cultural decay, a void between greatness. But during this period, universities formed, agricultural innovation advanced, architectural breakthroughs reshaped skylines, classical texts were preserved and transmitted. The term gained popularity during the Renaissance. Thinkers framed their era as light after darkness. Contrast is persuasive, dark to bright, ignorance to reason. It feels poetic, but poetry is not evidence. Entire centuries were compressed into a metaphor, and once labelled, they rarely get re-examined. So what connects all 15 lies? They were efficient at inspiring pride, efficient at mobilizing anger, efficient at simplifying complexity. History does not spread like an archive, it spreads like a rumor. The shortest version travels fastest. The most emotional version lasts longest. The cleanest version wins. But reality is not clean. It is layered, contradictory, inconvenient, and that is precisely why it gets compressed. If generations inherited these simplified narratives without question, what simplified narratives are shaping us now? Because myths do not disappear, they evolve, and repetition is more powerful than correction. The question is not whether history contains lies, it's whether we are comfortable repeating them. If this changed the way you see the past, subscribe, because the stories they simplified are rarely the ones that matter least. They're the ones that shape everything.